All right, then I'm going to share the slides. I tell you what, I'll put the slide set in the chat. I emailed it to everybody, but just to be sure Terry has a copy, I should have done that before, but okay, I think I can do it easily. All right, I posted a copy of it in the chat. Now I'm going to share my screen. All right, so as before, I'm going to minimize my the attendees screen, so I won't see you. If you like to say something, just jump in and start sharing. I won't see you raise your hand. So um, anyway, it's nice to be back for another session of the Peter's book, the Leader's Handbook. Today we'll discuss competency three, understanding how we learn, develop, and improve, leading the true learning and improvement. And competency four, understanding people and why they behave as they do. Uh, Knowing Peter and his background and his areas of interest, these are some of the areas he really had a clear and comprehensive understanding of it and contributed to understanding Dr. Deming's philosophy and expanding on that. Of course, these are, as before, these are the people who I usually credit to helping me understand, learning from them. I Let me see here. I um, Through Dr. Deming's learning exposure, I learned about Schuhart and Ackoff and Peter Scholtes. Of course, Peter turned out to be not only my neighbor but my good friend. Over the years, we had quite a bit of time together. So these are the competencies. There are six competencies, and today we're on uh, three and four. And next week we'll discuss five and six. And then I have left the variation to the end um, after that, out of order, because after the understanding variation briefly, we move on into performance appraisal and the fallacy of the performance appraisal and what to do instead. All right. So competency three is understanding how we learn, develop, and improve, leading true learning and improvement. And one of Peter's teachers was Malcolm Knowles, and he wrote the one of the forewords to the team handbook. Malcolm Knowles was a leader in developing adult education modalities, and he was promoted lifelong learning. He said that lifelong learning and improvement for individuals, organizations, and communities are no longer optional. And we'll see in a moment why with the changes that are occurring around us. Peter uses two models in order to um, make the point in terms of true learning and lifelong learning. One is this, that on one side we see the changes in technology, uh, uh, how the frequency of changes in technology versus the frequency of changes in the lifespan. As you can see, the frequency of changes in technology and the time between those is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, as the technology expands and the frequency increases, the lifespan increases, and it started at about 40 years, and then it moves. There is a problem with this graph. Peter was very frustrated. This is also supposed to increase and gradually to 80 years. He worked very hard to for the publisher to get that. And in the next printing, this is what they did, which is also wrong. You don't go like this and all of a sudden fall into 80. And it really made him frustrated. It's supposed to be a gradual increase. And so this is the change in technology. Another graph that is very helpful is the rate of change over time. And he used that a version of that by Stafford Beer. This is about the rate of travel, the change in travel, and we've used it in one of the lectures in the past. You can use that the same as for communications or for computing. For years, for centuries, the fastest man could travel was a galloping horse about 53 miles per hour. And then with the start of the uh, steam powered trains, and you see how the rate, and then we have um, uh, bullet trains come along and other travel modalities come along, and you see how the increase in the rate of travel is. So the rate of change is suddenly an exponential rate after um, so long that we were limited to the travel. So, I was born somewhere over here, and as you can see, just in my 7 decades, you see how the rate of change and how the change has occurred, as what I have witnessed in the travel time. So this speaks to the rate of change as it relates to transportation. Now, there are other things. Just for example. I just want to emphasize this. This rate of change is very important. It's not like that there were no changes during this time, but the changes were very slow. It was so slow that people could respond to it very easily. When you travel, the longest you travel a few miles, it's not, you never leave your village or your community. There were changes, but the rate of change was slow enough for people to respond to. But at this time, the rate of change is very rapid and very fast. As an example, just looking at how the rate of change has happened, man has always had this vision of flying, but it wasn't until 1903 when the Wright brothers flew. But as a short time after that, only about 35 years, we had a commercial plane and commercial flight. A short time after that, Chuck Yeager breaks the sound barrier. And then by 1951, these are really short times. By 1951, we have first uh, jet engine commercial plane. And then by 69, we have all these jumbo jets. Now we're talking about space travel. And just in a century or so, how that technology has changed and the rate of change in that area. Here is another example of there is in museums you find Leonardo da Vinci had a vision of of flying, and he developed some design called Da Vinci helicopters. Um, and there are some graphics and designs in some museums. They are known as Da Vinci helicopters. But it wasn't It was 450 years it took to go from a concept to actual product. Igor Sikorsky in 1921 was the first helicopter. 450 years went by before that happened. Or similarly, in the computing, for ever people use fingers and pebbles for counting. Pascal developed a counting machine in 1750 to do just simple arithmetic. But it wasn't until 1946 that the first computer was developed. In a matter of just a few years, by mid 60s, the computers were used in aviation and planning and operations and in banking in universities. In 1962, Kennedy said we were going to space. Just in a short time, 7 years later, we were on the moon. You see the time that um, the time is span in terms of going from a concept to actually a product. Look at the computing capacity of NASA when we landed on the moon. They had 32,767 8-bits of RAM and 72 kilobytes of RAM. This is a picture of my old phone has with 4 gigabytes. I had over 1 million times of RAM and I had 7 million times of RAM in the palm of my hand. Just the power of computing, how much that has increased. So the rate of change are very fast, very increasing. I always chuckle at this slide. This is a slide I used to show to my undergraduate students. And I would say, if you were born somewhere around 2000, late 1990s, this is what I had in my office to do my job. And all of you are sitting right there. All of this is sitting in the palm of your hand. Just the rate of change and the power of change that has occurred over time. Well, because of the rate of change that is occurring, well, we have to do things differently. Some of the solutions we're offering are no longer, the problems are no longer there. So I've combined a couple of ideas from Ackoff and with Peter and address the notion of change and learning. What Ackoff says, we have to understand the nature of change. And most changes are not improvement. Over time, such changes will be very costly and disastrous. We have to understand the nature of change before we can manage it. Organizations must learn to adapt to rapid rate of change, not just to change. The nature of the change that we are dealing with is very rapid. With a rapid change, and because of the interaction of occurring around us, the problems are more complex. Peter says 95% of changes are not improvement. They're changes. They're not improvement. And over time, that leads to a worse situation. So what Ackoff says, first, although technological and social changes have been accelerating, until recently, it has been sufficiently slow to adapt, as I was just mentioning. However, the current rate of change is so rapid that any delayed response to changes can be very costly and disastrous. So that's one aspect of the nature of the change. The second nature of the characteristic of change is that as the rate of change increases, so does the complexity of the problems that we face increases. And then we are facing new dilemmas. A dilemma, Ackoff says, is a problem that cannot be solved with current view of our views of the world, with the current abilities or competencies or capabilities. And that the dilemmas are due to increased interactions and interdependencies. Therefore, simple solutions to complex problems did not work. And he uses the Humpty Dumpty dilemma. He says there are things that we took apart and we couldn't put it back together. We took a machine apart, we took something apart, we took a problem apart, but we couldn't solve it. You couldn't solve that problem. You couldn't put it back together. It's just like Humpty Dumpty. Even the Kingsmen couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together. So it says that these are the characteristics of changes. Then he suggests there are two types of changes. There are changes that we cannot control, and there are changes and the others, the changes that we have some control over. I have no control over the weather. I have no control over some economic challenge cycles. But I have a control over where the organization is going. I have control over marketing. I have control over consumer research. I have control over innovation and design. So what are the strategies that we need to develop in terms of this type of changes? One is to it is better to build greater immunity to changes that we cannot control. I can't control the financial cycles, but perhaps I can develop a better immunity against that. I cannot control the weather, but perhaps I can create better immunity against that. And the example is that, an umbrella salesman said, only a fool buys an umbrella on a rainy day. A wise person buys an umbrella on a sunny day, building immunity. And so you build more immunity against the changes you can control, and then greater control over the others. In other words, you can shape your own future. You can plan your future. The subtitle of the Ackoff's book is "Plan the Future, or it will be planned for you." So we build more immunity against changes we cannot control, and then greater control over others, like planning, like constancy of purpose. Terry's doing this is with better understanding of Deming philosophy and how to plan the future, innovation. And you can do those things is improve current products and services, improving the current products and services. That's the strategy to undertake. Or innovate new products and services. That would be the strategy as how to respond to having better control on shaping the future. So these are some of the Ackoff's ideas, but what Peter added to this conversation is that we should have rapid and lifelong learning, not individually and organizational. In order to be able to respond to the changes around us and plan the future and build better control over our future and shape our futures, we need to employ rapid lifelong learning, not only individually, but organizationally as well. So that's what Peter suggests. That's what Peter discusses in his book is lifelong learning. He has a great background in that with his work with Malcolm Knowles. That lifelong learning, that learning must be lifelong. Education, or to educate, the origin of that word is to lead. Schools must lead students into learning how to learn. And he says the leaders of today must be educators. Okay? Must be educators. Help everyone to learn and help everyone to move forward. Our organizations and communities must be the centers of lifelong learning. How do we improve the quality of life for our employees? How do we improve the quality, create joy in work, as that was his company's slogan? And is how do we turn our organization as a community as a community and center of lifelong learning. Organizations without systems of continuous learning are probably doomed to obsolescence. Doomed to obsolescence. When I was typing this, it reminded me of something Dr. Deming said in a seminar, and it's still with me after all these years, as though he just said it this morning. Something was a book or something came around in the late 80s or 90s, planned obsolescence. That was kind of a catchy phrase at that time. And I remember Dr. saying, you don't have to plan for obsolescence. It just moves in. It just moves in. And
It's
and go ahead.
I was just going to mention I used that term last week with it was my wife and I think it was my daughter and her husband, and to all three of them did not know that term at all. I said, you've got to be kidding me. My wife is like 5 years younger than me, and of course my kids are quite a bit younger, in their mid-20s, but they had never heard the term planned obsolescence. I said, well, you're living it every day.
I
You own
know.
it. So I described it to them that they go, that's a strategy. I said, yeah,
Yeah.
it absolutely is a strategy for companies.
Well, the companies who don't learn, the companies who don't innovate, the companies who don't plan, the obsolescence just moves in. And all of a sudden they realize, oh, what happened? And that's when they blame everything and everybody else. It's either the government, the union, the foreigners, the Japanese. I remember in the 70s and 80s, they blamed the Japanese for all the good cars competition. So it just moves in, and and especially with the kind of rate of change that we are experiencing, it moves in faster now, unless we have an awareness, we have a plan the future, or it will be planned for you. Okay. So, even in a short time, that in the last decade or so, how many organizations and companies are no longer around just because they didn't plan the future. So, what is the foundation of learning in the Leader's Handbook? What he suggests, which taps into a lot of the Deming's teaching. He quotes George Box. Dr. Box was a University of Wisconsin eminent statistician. He says that all theories are wrong, but some are useful. And he says, Dr. Deming says that all theories are right in some world. All right, and depending on the world that you're applying that theory, he says they're pretty much saying the same thing. They're pretty much saying the same thing. That the proof of a theory is in its successful application. And he goes on to say that theories by themselves prove nothing. I can have a lot of theories and hunches. And theory by itself teaches nothing. Application by itself teaches nothing. Learning is the result of dynamic interplay between the two. I really like that. My students really like that when we talked about. Learning is the result of dynamic interplay between the two. And he uses this graph that you have a hunch, a hypothesis, a guess, you apply it to practice, and this interaction of theories and practice is true learning, and improvement comes about. And this area, this is where knowledge is built. This is where learning is built, through this application of theory to practice. So, so, so theory by themselves teaches nothing. Application by itself teaches nothing. Is the interaction, the interplay of the two that we learn and improve. Of course, some of those ideas is tapped into. Uh, sorry, I hit the wrong button. All right, you see my screen still?
Yes.
Okay. Of course, some of these ideas he taps into our well-known PDCA cycle, plan, do, study, act. I have added some of the ideas as what happens during the PDCA cycle. This is the cyclical learning model, and and if you adapt that to this, you see to his model. You plan, you do, and then study the results. Then you act, and depending on which is in this area now, depending on what you learn from that, you plan again, and this is the cycle of continuous improvement, and this is the knowledge. This is the same thing as that adapted to that model. Um, we were talking about planning and doing last week a little bit. What this is about how much we plan, and this is how much we do. We're always doing something, you know. I think it was Brian Joyner says, the adage, don't stand there, do something. He said, no, in a lot of organization, don't just do something, stand there. At least you're not making the matters worse. So, so, so most managerial dictums are hypotheses. A hypothesis by nature is useless unless it's proven by data. Managers must see themselves as experimenters who lead learning, not dictators who impose control. And the PDSA cycle may be used to test changes associated with long-term goals or short-term goals. And this is one of my favorite description Peter has. We cannot, so you're at this stage. We cannot promise that nothing will go wrong, but PDSA builds forgiveness into our work and a promise that we still learn from things gone wrong. That is this going through the cycle repeatedly and building knowledge and learning and improving. Dr. Deming has in the Art of the Crisis calls this the helix, and uh, and that's where the learning comes. The continually applying. Uh, you plan, you do, you study, you act. Depending on the action, you may have to go through the cycle. Uh, and this is from Dr. Deming. Um, is that the action may include abandon the change, adopt the change, or most likely to go through it under different circumstances, conditions. So that's what the forgiveness is. We get to this point and say, oh, maybe we have to revise our plan and our theory and go through the cycle again.
One of the best tools I found, I'm going to post this. I think most of you've seen it, but the Toyota Kata. And we learned very often when we started continuous improvement projects, the first thing we taught was the Toyota Kata, which embodies all of this into it. And to your point, Fazel, it can be used at almost any level of the business. But typically we use it with frontline coworkers to improve a process. But it is an iterative process with experimentation and then having a coach assigned to that learner. But it embodies the entirety of this cycle.
Yeah. Depending on the complexity of the problem at hand, this could be a 2 hour project, a 1 day project, a week or a year, or it depends on the complexity of um, the question at hand. Uh, and as you say that, and it can be applied to a variety of different conditions because you begin with a hunch, and the only way you have a hunch or a theory or something is to experiment with it and see what you learn from that. On larger scale, perhaps you're designing a new engine or other new device. You go through the process, you develop prototypes and test the prototypes and go through that. So this idea of learning and experimentation has its roots in the early um, thinkers in pragmatism. And Dr. Deming and Dr. Schuhart, particularly Dr. Schuhart, and some of the early thinkers were really influenced by the pragmatism, a quintessentially American uh, uh, philosophy. And the three people that I would like to refer to, one is John Dewey, was one of he's the father of experiential learning. He was one of the original pragmatists. But you hear Dr. Schuhart and Dr. Deming refer C.I. Lewis and the book Mind and the World Order. That's a very difficult book to read. Dr. Schuhart gave a copy to Dr. Deming, and Dr. Deming says in the actually the New Economics, he said, I read it 7 times, or maybe in somewhere else. He said, I read it 7 times. I told Dr. Schuhart that I really don't get it. He told him, stay with it. So, and then the other one, Percy Bridgman, a physicist, a Nobel laureate, who was actually known as as an operationalist, and that's where the original operational definition come from. So C.I. Lewis, known for was the favorite reading for. Remember, just notice that Schuhart wasn't telling people go read the statistics. He was giving them books on philosophy to read, books on law to read, suggested. It wasn't go read the statistics or probability laws. Is the learn the philosophy. And Percy Bridgman and the logic of the modern physics. While he was a physicist, his philosophical is expressed in this book is a textbook application of pragmatic principles to the hard science. And so Schuhart used those and referred to them. Schuhart um, was really a pragmatist. That knowledge about the world is gained empirically. That's a pragmatic uh, uh, concept. Theory is the basis for prediction. Prediction leads to action, reflection, and action. These are all from Schuhart, but it's rooted in pragmatism. In fact, Dr. Schuhart says the reason for the three sigma is based on practical experience. It's not some theoretical concept. If you read his notes books, it says practical experience that shows that three sigma limits are the best balance between best economic balance. And then the actual PDCA cycle is rooted in pragmatism and experiential learning. And of course, Deming essentially took Bridgman and others' operationalism and said that theory of knowledge helps us to understand that management in any form is about prediction. Prediction is actually a pragmatic concept and notion. So they're rooted in that. They're rooted in a philosophy. And then John Dewey himself, the father of experiential learning, says the separation of theory and practice, knowing and doing, is great mistake. Experimentalism is the way by which we learn, and he suggested that the experiential method is the method of learning rather than logic. Life is like a series of experiments. He actually opened the lab school in Chicago that is still around, and it was the School of Experiential Learning. So the models that we were just talking about, its roots is in is in pragmatism. This is from Dr. Schuhart's book on takes the linear learning process of specification and production and inspection and turns it into cyclical. Something is falls off the cliff here. We're not learning. There is no feedback loop essentially. And he closed the loop, and that was Dr. Deming took that and called the original Shuhart cycle, which was the basis of what later on he taught the Japanese and later on became the PDSA cycle. What's interesting, this is the inquiry model by by Dewey in early 1920s, what they call the inquiry model, and that is a cyclical relationship, and a lot of these are tied into that and based on that. So it's about lifelong learning. So Peter also discusses not all learners learn alike. As a teacher, I know that. I used to get in front of the class and lectures, no matter who was in there and how were their learning modalities was. I lecture and they take notes, and this is the learning process. That is really not the way to go. He describes that there are three learning modalities. One is a group are visual learners. These are learning by watching and reading and writing. There are auditory learners that learn but through hearing and conversing. And there are kinesthetic learners. These are the learners by doing, by experience and activity. These are various learning modalities that are essential. I know in my case, I need all three of them. Sometimes one modality is more dominant than others. That may be the case for you too. But I know that all modalities are essential to the learning process. Some are more dominant than others. So in my classes, that was a fun experiment to do with the students. And I would pose a question. Considering we've just gone through this model. Considering the learning modalities presented by Scholtes, what is your learning style? What have you learned lately that is unique and different? I want to pose that question to you, and I'm going to stop sharing, and maybe you can share your experience. Considering the learning modalities presented here, um, what is your learning style? What have you learned lately that is unique and different? So why don't we just share for a moment as your experience with that? What
Yeah,
is your
yeah,
uh,
I can. I'll start. Yeah, I was just learning a new CRM software that we put into our dealerships, and the instructor or the trainer, he showed me, and I listened, and then I heard what he said. So visual, auditory, and then I said to Rob, I said, I have to do it. I have to actually physically put some guest names into CRM, and then we need to go through it 3 or 4 times. So I took all three. I used all three.
our
Yeah.
three modalities, learning
Yeah.
styles? Yeah. Yeah, jump in. Everybody can jump in. You're muted, Dennis.
I'll offer that my experience is much the same as Terry's. Um, in my youth, my father wanted to teach me how to do a variety of things. And so he would tell me what we were going to do, then he would show me how it's done, and then he would coach me as I did it. And over time, I've learned that that is really kind of how I try to help other people, is by going through those three different ways. And the experience I passed on to my stepson, belovedly, used that because his mother wanted two sinks changed, and I said, "Well, how about if I do the first one, and I'll tell you, I'll show you, and you can help me, and then on the second one, you can repeat the process that you just observed, and I'll help you."
Anybody else?
I think similar. I think more and more though it's been kinesthetic. I've learned, as you get a little bit older, you start to learn that maybe you have a little ADHD, maybe you have a little
Hmm.
a little bit on a spectrum. So I'm finding more and more that my challenge over the years of trying to learn something was based on not diving in, rolling up my sleeves, and actually doing the work, as Terry had mentioned. The interesting thing now with AI, I've been working with a gentleman that's building a custom chat that tries to, through some questioning, but through your interaction with chat, it starts to learn your learning modality, and then when it starts to coach, its prompts are based on your probably primary modality, which I think is really interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing what AI can do to really break through a lot of issues that people have with learning, because there's usually one way of learning in a classroom, and with AI now, you can adapt to just about any learning style relatively inexpensively. So I'm looking forward to diving into more of that and learning more about how that'll work.
Mike, you might find Ted Nelson's 70th birthday talk super interesting. He talks about his concept for a what he calls an eduteria, basically a cafeteria style education system, which was quite interesting and kind
Yeah,
of along those lines.
I was in K-12 in the market. We sold curriculum and then started building out a learning environment. So I watched it, and a lot of schools look like prisons on the edge of town. And I always question, how valid is that model going forward? And I think we're going to learn very quick that that model is finally going to get broken, I hope.
Yeah, school is prison. I was a prisoner, and when I realized this, it was very bad for me.
Well,
Anyway, I'll go next. So my primary, I'm primarily an auditory learner. I like to hear things, like learning things via listening to audiobooks and things like that. But then my secondary, and that I go into very quickly, is kinesthetic, and visual is my weak one. And I don't know how people consider reading, but my wife was noting that reading is a visual learning task for her. But for me, it is an auditory task because I'm talking to myself in my head. So it's very, we have a very different experience there, and sort of like acquiring information from books. I'm a very slow reader because of that.
Well, for me, I have a range of styles. I like to keep up on news, so I'm reading incessantly. So I'm a reader and a devourer of that. But then being retired, I've got time to do projects, and I've got lots of hobbies, and I like to do the maintenance of those hobbies. So I've got a motorcycle, and I've got a little two-seat airplane. And whenever I come across something I need to do, I like to go to YouTube, see somebody else do it, and then I'm an engineer by original training, so I can generally figure things out, and I just begin and go slow, and I can take on projects with YouTube and some reading and thought.
Hello, everybody. This is Dirk. I'm a
hi there.
visual learner. For instance, the slide sets that Fazel provides are really helpful for me to see and look at the diagrams, etc. And a related example, we had a wedding in the family last week, and people were telling me the names of the in-laws, if you will, the family structure, etc., all verbal. They told it to me over and over, and finally I said, please write it down. Make me a chart of everybody's name and relationship. And I took a photo of it and kept it with me for the 3 days of the event, and I referred to it over and over, visual. And maybe it's due to the complexity of all the names, so maybe um, an oral approach wouldn't work for anybody, but it certainly didn't for me. I needed visual.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to share with you something I learned recently. It's not a skill, but it's something is unique and different. Uh, I don't know which modality it falls under, but it's kind of a biblical learning. So uh, I'm not a biblical person. So, but as I knew I have to share. If I'm asking you a question to share, then I need to share too. So I wanted to come up with something, and I was thinking about all the work I've done over the years in different things. I've done other work too. So I've been a teacher. I'm doing social work and things like that. So I just read this just recently. You know, the concept of faith without works is dead. That's a line in the Bible. Faith without works is dead. And so this man is writing a letter to somebody about his work and the kind of the challenges he has in order to promote some of the work, just like you are trying to promote Deming's philosophy and creating a better world and build a community. He says, what I have learned is this, and this is the line that really got my attention because I started questioning some of my own work. And he says, in conclusion, about all the work they're doing, that sometimes they won't get anywhere, and says, we have now conclusively proved that works without faith is dead also. Works, not only faith without works is dead, they say we already know that, but we have now conclusively proved that works without faith is dead also. Do I really believe in the kind of work I do? I mean, do I have faith in that work? And I thought, gee, that's really a profound statement. Yeah, faith without works is dead, but works without faith is dead also. In terms of the commitment and the faith in the work and direction that you are going and you're doing. So I found that pretty unique and as Peter Scholtes says about at the beginning of his book was a brain shaker, kind of an aha moment. Faith without works is dead, but we have now conclusively proved that works without faith is dead also. All right, so we'll get back to our slides here, and so now we're moving on to competency 4, understanding people and why they behave as they do. And Peter is really good at this topic and many other topics. And this falls into motivation, why people do what they do. And in previous conversations we've had, we talked about the current view of an organization is as a machine, because Ackoff says the machine age. So man is designed to do the work, and man is a resource, and hence the human resources department. And this is the machine age view, treating people as a resource. There was a book back in the 90s about all these closures and companies going out of business and layoffs. And it was really a depressing book, but a very good book. The title of it was The Disposable American. And then that's thousands of people are laid off. What happens to them? What happens to their families, to them, to their families, to their communities? And so we treat people as disposable material. And as I heard Dr. Deming say once, of the greatest fear of an American is, am I going to have a job tomorrow? So whatever theories of motivation that was developed over the years was how to get work out of people. That was the idea. And the current practices relating to people is predominantly from this machine age with various twists. like this is Peter's favorite line in the book, like another tune on the triangle. And all the modern behavior modification theories, B.F. Skinner and others, it was how to get something out of people. And of course, a lot of the theories of motivation were developed from that. He also, in order to understand people and why they do what behave they do, uh, he says that the greatest extent people behave in a way with how we expect them to behave. And he offers two books, two ideas. One is the book by Douglas McGregor, The Human Side of Enterprise. In that book, McGregor discusses theory X and theory Y. Theory X is that we see people as not interested in work. They don't want to work. They're not motivated. They have to be uh, uh, forced to do. They don't want to take responsibility. That's theory X. If you view people that way, this is how they behave. But theory Y, we'll talk a lot more about this in the performance appraisal section of our series. Theory Y, you believe people want to do a good job. They want to assume responsibility and they want to work. Well, that's the way they behave. Another book that he suggests is Pygmalion in Management. It explores the same subject. And the Pygmalion effect is Pygmalion was a play by George Bernard Shaw. The Pygmalion effect in management is often the so-called self-fulfilling prophecy. Is the phenomenon where a manager's expectation of an employee directly influences that employee's performance, what you expect them. And My Fair Lady movie back in the 60s was based on that. And so if a manager wants, this is really a very critical point to make. If a manager wants to know why people do what they do, a good starting point is for the manager to examine his or her own expectation. There is a good likelihood that self-fulfilling prophecies are at work. There is a good likelihood that self-fulfilling prophecies at work. So what is, there is a lot of discussion in this area about motivation. And Peter relies on Frederick Herzberg, and he uses a lot of his materials. And his famous paper he's done a lot of work, Herzberg has, but one famous paper is, One More Time, How Do You Motivate People? And the response to that is, you can't. You can't. And it is the ultimate management conceit. He really writes good in this area, Peter does. It is the ultimate management conceit to believe that we can motivate people. Motivation is not some substance we can infuse from the outside, like a bone marrow transplant. Managers' attempt to motivate can actually demotivate, like compensations or an external motivation. It is a cynical and perverted view of people that management has. Unquestioned truth by managers that people must be motivated through a combination of promises and rewards and threats of punishment, that it has to come from outside. Okay? That extrinsic motivation, kita, that's kick in the pants, actually. So that this is Herzberg's term. Carrots and a stick, merit pay, incentive bonuses. The assumption is that the employee must be withholding some reservoir of effort waiting to be bribed or extracted from you. What is the employee withholding that you have to get it out of them through a bonus or a commission? What are they withholding? These are all the bases of extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is not something that gets done to people. Rather than it's something that people do. People exercise self-direction and self-control in the service of objectives to which they are committed to. That's intrinsic motivation. It comes from inside, if they're committed to it. It's not something from outside that you can beat it out of people, either through carrots or sticks. Another area that he discusses in the book as it relates to people and how they behave, the way they behave, is building relationships. Building on what Ackoff says, think of the organization as a social system. It's the organization is actually a community. And this is what Peter suggests, and I put it in bold because they really speaks to the question, the issue, the topic at hand. It says, understanding people requires understanding relationships. Most manager-employee relationships are patronizing and paternalistic. Perhaps the greatest challenge facing today's leader is to learn to help people understand and appreciate their interdependencies. We promote all this rugged individualism, go you do it, as though you don't need other people. I heard Dr. Deming said about the very subject from the stage that we have ruined the rugged individualism by promoting these things. We are socially interdependent because as human we need each other. No man is an island. We are systemically interdependent because that's how the work gets done. No man is an island. Create not only a business, but a community of people. That's what the organization should be. Build a community. It's a community of people. Then how do he has some suggestions about how you build relationships, particularly with people that you might even have some adversarial relationship. It should be personal, face-to-face, first name and to first name. Listen to each other's stories. This is how you build relationship. Each respects the other. Know the vulnerabilities and hot buttons. Care enough to avoid these things. This is how we build relationships. Listen to each other, find some common areas, respect each other, and work on things that we care about. Know each other's vulnerabilities and hot buttons. And the other topic that is relating to people and these competencies and why people, the way they behave, is the question of trust. An understanding of people and relationships requires understanding of trust, he says. And this was quite a learning for me. How do you build trust? Trust requires the coexistence of two converging beliefs. When I believe you are competent and that you care about me. You're competent and you care about me. These are the two beliefs that one must have. Both are necessary. So here is the extent to which I believe you care about me. It's from low to high, and this is that you are competent and capable. Now, you can care about me. That's a lot of affection. You must be very capable, but it's respect. But this quadrant, the interconverging of the two, is where the trust is built. That you're competent and you care about me. Each is demonstrated over time. You build trust over time. Begin by doing simple, low-risk activities in order to build trust. Back in the 90s, there was a book I found a copy of it is The Economics of Trust by John Whitney. I saw him actually at one of the Ohio Quality and Productivity Forum sessions presented. And this is a good book, and Dr. Deming wrote the foreword to it, The Economics of Trust. All right. So the last topic that I would like to discuss, and it's relating to these competencies, and Peter addresses that at a different part of the book, but I have combined them here. This discussion of organizational culture. He calls it, this is perhaps an oxymoron. I've sat through so many discussions about organizational culture, and it really bores you to death. It's just as effective of all these lectures and discussions about leadership. They only present some artifacts, or they like leadership. There is a list of do's and don'ts. But culture is an anthropological word, and Peter says. What Margaret Mead learned when studying the mating habits of island tribes. What does someone mean when you're referring to an organizational culture? Sometimes we discuss organizational culture and behavior as though there is something out there. There is an organization out there that behaves independent of people inside the organization. It has its own behavior. The behavior of this organization is just a reflective of the behavior of the leadership and people in the organization. It's not two separate activities. It's not two separate phenomena. It only represents what's going on inside the organization. Dysfunctionality is if the organizational behave an appearance of dysfunctional behavior is because internally they're dysfunctional. So one observation he makes is that when using the word culture, it often takes ordinary dysfunctional behavior and elevates it to something ethereal. It is the organizational equivalent of the word personality. Often organizational culture is an excuse for obnoxious behavior. I really like that. And he shares a story. I'm going to read it to you. I didn't want to, it's on page 179. That he makes that point. It's called, I'm going to stop sharing. So it's on page 179. It's called Arrested Adolescence and Organizational Culture. He writes really just funny and cynical. He says, I was invited to visit a major production facility of a well-known high-tech manufacturer. One of my first appointments was with the director of facility. He was also a senior vice president of company. After introduction, I could tell by his silence that he expected me to initiate the conversation. So I asked him, you're just beginning to lead this part of the company into applying the philosophy of quality to its approaches. How do you expect your job to change as a result of this? His response, I'm not interested in discussing that Western intellectual bullshit. Then silence. My question may not have been brilliant, but it deserved a better response than I got. I honestly cannot recall the rest of the conversation. Somehow we got through it. I later visited with friends who worked in this facility and described this incident, commenting on how rude this facility director was. Oh, my friend responded, you don't understand our culture. That's how managers treat people here. It's called constructive confrontation. I would call it arrested dysfunctional adolescent social skills, sometimes called being a brat. This company calls it culture and declares it something admirable. I later learned that in their catalog of corporate training programs, They offer the course in constructive confrontation. Okay, class. Now imagine yourself to be a precarious,
Precocious.
my glasses, precocious, spoiled, antisocial 12-year-old brats. So that's, when we talk about cultures and all of that, that's what people try to describe in terms of what the organization culture is. So we'll be finishing up.
It's certainly a taste of Peter's sense of truth and humor.
The humor, and he always claimed I can be cynical too. He always it must be my cynicism, he would say, before he makes a comment like that. All right. So he says, if it means, this is really a good description. If it means anything, culture should describe the day-to-day experience of the ordinary worker. Culture is what makes the experience of the working at any company different from doing the same work at another company offering similar services or products. How do I feel about this organization? What is my experience? Okay. So that's really a manifestation of the culture. So I took those ideas, I included, this is what Peter just said. Ed Schein is a culture thinker. It says culture can be defined as a pattern of shared basic assumption that the group learned as it solved its problem. How do we solve our problem? Problems of external adaptation and internal integration that has worked well enough to be considered valid and therefore to be taught to new members as the correct way to perceive, think, and feel in relations to those problems. So that's by Ed Schein. What I believe is that a culture is a group of shared assumptions, certain things in a group that is shared or held in common, relationships, trust, problem solving, dealing with each other and the world. And it's our the groups, the organization's worldview. And this is what we discussed a few weeks back about our view of the world and what holds that up. I suggested systems thinking, understand the system of profound knowledge and the competencies. Whatever I say and do and behave and questions I ask, whatever comes out of my mouth is from my view of the world. Well, that can be applied to the organization. Our view of the world determines implicitly or explicitly, consciously or unconsciously, how we think, communicate, lead, manage, view people, plan, ask questions, build relationship, make decisions, even speak of culture. That is our culture. How do we look at each other? How do we look at the world? How do we solve problems? How do we take care of each other? Okay? How do we ask questions? Respects, relationship, all of that falls into that category, is our view of the world. Whatever comes out of my mouth, a question, a comment, or whatever it is represent what's going on in my head, my view of the world. And it's the same way with the organization. However the organization behaves, if there is such a thing, is a reflective of how the people in the organization, the leadership and the group, the management, how they view the world and how they ask questions, how they think, how they solve problems, how they help people to do better, how they build relationships. That's the culture. And you can feel that. Once you walk into an organization, you can feel that. Finally, just two graphs he uses to make some comments. This is known as the wisdom of Cherokee wisdom of leadership and competencies, that you must have clear intention, you must have affirmation and skillful means, and this is how successful work is done. Now, if you're living in this organization, are you worried about any of the problems that we have? That are you respected? That you like to do work and are supported? And he also talks about two components of the what he calls the the describes the two components of the culture. And he talks about every organization has an apparent organization. That's what's in the front, open to the open. Your products, your policies, your procedures, and whatever you do, everyday events that's going on. That's your apparent organization. Then there is the below the surface organization. And I want to read a couple of those characteristics. It was too much to put uh, in the slide. So I just want to read a couple of paragraphs on page 180 about this. The informal organization has its unofficial leaders and unwritten rules. The informal organization is shaped by the styles and values of its founders and leaders, and by its history, the residual impact of past victories and setbacks, old feuds and rivalries. The informal organization has its own communication channels, its grapevine. It consists of unofficial network and cliques. The informal organization often determines how well included and respected an employee feels. Inside the official organization and on its perimeter are various unofficial yet influential groups, each with its own unofficial, sometimes unspoken rule of membership. The informal organization makes decisions that can affect whether or not or how well the official decisions are implemented. I used to work with line supervisors that carried more weight than with people than the CEO of the organization. The hidden below the surface organization is what determines the average employee's workplace experience. The hidden organization creates and, for all practical purposes, constitutes the organization's culture. The higher in the organization someone is, the less likely he or she is to know or understand what the everyday worker experiences is for the ordinary employees. Therefore, the managers are all the least likely to understand the culture of their organization, though they are the ones most likely to talk about it. I'm sure you have experienced that. I know I have, that there is a below the surface organization. There are certain things that goes on as Peter just described. So this is the last one. That was the last step, the slide, and here is some questions for discussion. But I want to stop there and at least begin our discussion of the last slide. What has been your experience with below the surface? Or like I just said, I work in manufacturing. If I wanted, if I wanted to get something to the line employees, I knew supervisors and line managers that they carried weight. People would listen to them. They weren't in a position of authority, but they were in the position of moral authority. And people listened to them. That's all you had to do. And I've had that experience. What has been your experience in terms of these two features of a culture and an organization?
Well, I mean, I worked in a company where I was the first full-time employee of the company. So the managers and the owners were not full-time with the company, and I was. And we had a very not talkative enough culture, right? There was a lot of the folks who were not doing the work would go and make decisions, and they'd be a surprise to us. And this was a thing that carried on through the organization as we grew. We managed to grow to about 110 staff over 5 years, and then we had a contraction to about 50, and now the company's still kicking around. They have like a dozen employees. But what I didn't understand was that this lack of openness caused us to often be at odds. So when our CTO quit, we ended up having lunch after he invited me to lunch, and he was like, "Oh, we should get together now that I'm not working there." And we were having this, and he's telling me this story, and I'm like, "Oh my God, our like lack of open communications was like killing us." Like I'd been angry at him for literally years, and it was actually he was fighting a battle with our CEO to keep him from doing crazy things, and I was fighting a different battle trying to keep the him from doing crazy things to our development teams. But our lack of openness was a problem, and that was our culture, right? Is that we didn't talk openly.
Wow.
So it was an interesting experience, and since then I try and be excessively open to the point where I don't worry if I'm going to get myself fired for saying things anymore. I feel like the opposite is better.
So Terry, you're in a position to speak to this since you're running an organization and you have, I don't know. So what has been your experience with this?
Yeah, I definitely agree. There's below surface and the apparent. My experience is sometimes when I want to find out something as a CEO, I'll go to verify um, the I guess to verify if it's an assumption or not. I'll go talk to say a technician, a service technician, and one who's a leader but not appointed a leader. He's an internal leader amongst a group of technicians, and I'll ask him, and he'll tell me. I think he tells me the truth of what's really happening, so I can confirm, an assumption of somebody uh, tells me something. And culture. I mean, we work on culture, trying to have an open culture. We do an opinion survey, and one thing that we discovered where there's a lack of trust in one of our dealerships is when we did the survey, it asked for the age of the associate. And it was just the way the opinion survey was constructed. And what came out from the managers was people couldn't be some people, a group of people, maybe 30% couldn't be totally open because if they put their age in, it was totally confidential. They put their age in, management could relate to which associate that was because of their tenure in the company.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. When I heard that, I couldn't believe it that people were afraid to. So next round, we're not going to ask them to put their age into the opinion survey.
What do you think, I'm going to ask you a Deming-esque question. Like they say, I heard this in a conference, and that uh, when somebody asks Dr. Deming, well, our people don't work together or this and that, so what is your compensation policy? It sounds like unrelated, but it is. It is how
Yes.
you build the barriers, and that's
Yeah.
why people don't communicate.
Yes.
As in the systems thinking, we always talk about the structure drives the behavior.
Yes.
If you build a structure that people do not communicate, they compete, they do this and that, well, they're not going to communicate. So why do you think that fear is there?
Within the compensation system, you mean?
No, within the question you brought up, why were people fearful to be? I'm not. You don't have to. I'm
Yeah.
just saying that would be a question. This. Am I just changing the symptom of the problem? Does revising the survey is going to remove that fear? That's what I'm getting at. Is that
Yeah.
what is the root cause, or what is the cause of this demotivation, or the cause of fear, or the cause of lack of communication? That's that's something that perhaps needs to be
addressed. Yeah. Thank
yeah.
you for sharing that, because that's a good point. Yeah, changing
Changing the survey is not going to remove the
right.
causes of fear.
Yeah. I reflected on it. I haven't really, because well, when that was presented to the management group, one general manager said, "Gee, we've never ever reprimanded anyone for bringing up you know uh, their opinion or and maybe that when I was younger, to be honest with you, I would, when someone did bring something up like that, I would probably react the wrong way.
Yeah.
So that could be a carryover from a
Yeah.
legacy carryover as you said, is in the culture that's carried over for years,
Yeah.
you know. But
I had a very interesting cultural experience at work. I used to work for a tier one supplier to Ford. This organization was put in a very an economically depressed community for large tax breaks from the state, and the employees had very little experience in any kind of formal workspace or manufacturing or automotive supply, etc. And the two day shift production supervisors were quote unquote community leaders. They were ex-gang leaders. And they talk about referent authority or perceived authority or looked to as a leader was really noticeable. It was overt. You could watch it. They were very good at organizing, leading, instructing, helping, supporting, and which is very interesting. I wouldn't have expected that coming out of a life of being a gang leader. But so not only were they good with people, but that idea of being referred to as a leader and respected was really interesting. So that's one experience I had that I will never forget.
yeah, it's something.
I'm thinking about my experience in consulting and the difference between organizations I would observe. And the type of organization where the culture was great was the kind of organization where the mission was good. People could get into it and appreciate it and believed in it. And these were children's hospitals. It was easy for people to have a sense of we're in this together because the mission was so good. And I think
Yeah.
that's the source of the downfall in places where it's not working well.
Right.
That the mission is something that is not honorable, or it's just make more money,
Yeah.
or those are the kind of things that you have to think about. I believe as a leader, what's the reason we're doing this work, and make it an honorable
Yeah.
and worthwhile objective.
And that's what the intrinsic motivation Peter refers to, is that commitment to the objective. That's the intrinsic motivation.
I'm thinking about a quote, and I can't remember if it was Peter or Gypsy Ranny or who, but the quote was, "If you want people to do a good job, give them a good job to do."
I like that. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. I was looking at the iceberg, and a company I worked for almost 19 years. It was hard to describe, the culture there, but I think more of the iceberg is exposed. So there's less of the below the surface. And it was an incredible experience working there. And, Terry mentioned about the surveys, and early on they were doing what were called satisfaction surveys. That's before engagement. Then they moved to engagement, but the last survey they did was called an alignment survey. It really spoke to what they were looking for in the organization. And if you talk to almost anyone in the company, they could speak to, who do we serve? Why do we serve them? It was in K-12 education. Back to your story, Mike. Strong sense of mission and purpose.
Mhm.
But I hadn't thought about that. But the more the iceberg is exposed, meaning there's very little below the surface organization, I think you have a much healthier organization. I didn't have a way to speak to that, but it's a great metaphor.
Yeah.
I'll add an observation about that same diagram. I was thinking about the 1990s when I first saw this diagram. I thought that seemed pretty reasonable. And then over time, as I left that organization that I spent quite a bit of time in and became a consultant looking at other companies, I started to make an assessment that it way underestimated what was underwater in most of the companies that I was consulting with. And over time, I got to the belief that what's underwater and not seen, not evident in the organization charts and the artifacts are pretty close to what Dr. Deming described as 95% of the performance comes from the system, not from special causes. And it's made me rethink about what my earlier assessment was when I thought that that diagram was pretty accurate. Maybe I just didn't know enough to recognize how bad it can be.
There is a strong grapevine in the below the surface culture and organization. So, all right. So we're at 3:33, 34. Any final comments before we close?
I had one question for Mike. Mike, how would you expose more of the lower part of the iceberg?
Is that for me?
Yeah, well, either one, Mike. Either Mike, because I think Mike, you mentioned the more you expose, the better.
I would say go and ask questions and be humble and be honest with people.
Okay.
One of the better definitions I saw of culture is how we do things around here. And this gets to that grapevine. And I think if you start to ask, what are those unwritten rules that you find are really undermining the business and how the business operates? And I think the more of those you understand, you're exposing that below the surface organization. And it is, you very quickly learn you either live by those rules or you won't be a good fit, and you'll either walk or they're going to help you walk. So understanding those unwritten rules and ones that are maybe well hidden can probably start to expose what's happening in the organization.
I guess another way to look at it, Terry, is that the first question would be, why is there such a below the surface organization exists? That they have their own rules, they have their own grapevine, they have their own communication. Why is there such a thing exists? And start from there. Just like the same way, why would I be afraid to answer a question you ask me about my age? I mean, are you gonna get rid of me because of my age, or So those are some of the things that I think would get you to the is why is it there? Rather than working on this is, and Peter talks about that later. We talk about rather than working on motivating people, why don't we remove the causes of demotivation?
Yes, yeah.
Rather than working on communication, why don't we work on removing the barriers to communication? So that's more proactive,
But
motivating.
That's so hard.
Well, it is.
No one wants to do anything that hard.
Just remember, I give an ounce. I don't give a hoot about complexity on this side of simplicity, but I give my arm for the simplicity on the other side of complexity. We try to come up with simple solutions to very complex problems. It's just like performance appraisal. I don't want to deal with you. I just rank you from 1 to 5. I don't care who you are, what you are, what kind of
And
work you've
fire
done.
whoever is number 5, right?
Yeah, you have a family, you have problems, all of that. That's just park all of that outside the door when you come in. I'm just going to give you a scale, a number. That's dealing with the complex issue of people and motivation and performance with just a tick once a year. So yeah, we don't want to deal with complex problems. It's easy to as the Nasser at the fort said, yank him and rank them. Rank them and yank them. So that's how they wanted to deal with people.
Well, it may be oversimplistic, but I think the causes of fear are numerous in the
Yeah.
way we treat our relationships with the people in our
Yeah.
organizations. It's the point 8 drive out fear
Yeah.
requires the trust that we talked
Yes.
about earlier in the slide. I think
Yeah.
of trust as the antidote to the fear in
Yes.
organizations.
Yes. Yes. But it's what's interesting that a lot of these things are interrelated. You know, you talk about relationships, trust, fear, you can't really address each one of them in its own little bucket. It's not out there hanging, I'm going to work on trust, but it requires relationship.
Yeah.
You know, it requires, so these are all connected and complex at that. You know, I think, dealing with anything like that is a complex issue. All right, everyone. So hopefully I see you next week, and I'll send you the slides. And Terry, I'll add you to
Yes.
to the list. And if any of you want to exchange your information offline, so just build a larger community, Terry.
Good. Thank
And
you.
then
Thank you, Fazel.
sure. I rarely see a CEO in these meetings, so in all my work but I'm delighted that you're here and your experience is valuable.
Oh, thank you.
All
All right. Have a good day and have a good weekend.
Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.
Thank you.